Hey, before we start, I want you to imagine something. Let's tell a little story. Before the white missionaries came to Nigeria, life existed. Yes, life had been around for a long time. People like the Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, and many other groups were in their lands. They had their cultures, they had their languages, and they had their ways of worshipping their gods. In Yoruba land, for example, they believed Olodumare was the highest, but they also had gods like Sango, Osun, Oya, and Ogun. Every town had a god they worshipped. Life was good, they celebrated festivals, they told stories, and everything was going smoothly. I know you might be thinking, Jennifer, why are you saying all this? It's important. We need to know where we started before we can know where we've come from. It's not like there was nothing before Christianity arrived. No, people were living, they were farming, they were selling goods, they were having children, and they were worshipping the gods their ancestors handed down to them. They had kings and chiefs who ruled them. They had babalawos and yanifas who would consult the gods. That world was completely different from what we know today. Everything was based on traditional culture and customs. In those times there were no schools as we know them today. They taught children everything at home. The father would teach his son how to hunt or farm. The mother would teach her daughter how to cook and take care of the home. They used folk tales and proverbs to teach them wisdom and good character. As they grew, they learned about the laws of the land and how to worship the gods. There was no Bible, no Lord's Prayer, and no praise songs to Jesus. It was a traditional world with all its beauty and flaws. But as they lived in their world, something was about to happen. Change was coming from overseas. Some people who were different in skin color, different in language, and carrying a new message, had set off to come to Africa. They didn't know what they would encounter. The people of Nigeria also didn't know that strangers were coming. The whole world was about to change. A new story was about to begin, one that would affect all of us, even today. Let's move forward and see what the meeting of these two worlds was like. So now let's talk about these visitors. Who were they? What did they come to do? These first missionaries were people from Europe, especially from Britain. People like Henry Townsend, Thomas Birch Freeman, and Samuel Ajayi Crowther, who was a Yoruba person who had been enslaved but later became a Christian. They came by ship, crossing the big ocean. Their journey was not easy at all. They left their homes, their families, and everything they knew for one thing: the good news of Jesus Christ. They believed that God sent them to spread the good news to the ends of the earth. They brought their Bibles, they brought their songbooks, and they brought deep faith in their hearts. They arrived on the coast of Nigeria, in towns like Badagry and Abeokuta. Imagine how they must have felt. They saw people with different skin colors, different languages, and cultures that were totally different from theirs. The weather was hot and there were many insects. Everything was different, but their purpose did not change. They came to preach the love of Jesus. These people didn't just come with Bibles. No, they also brought education and healthcare. They knew that the way to reach people's hearts was to show them love in a way they could see. They started teaching people to read and write. They also started providing healthcare for the sick. For example, Thomas Birch Freeman, a missionary from the Methodist Church, arrived in Badagry in 1842. He started preaching and showed that he came in peace. Another name we must not forget is Samuel Ajayi Crowther. His story is amazing. He was born in the town of Osagun in Yoruba land. Slave traders captured him when he was young. But a British warship rescued him and took him to Sierra Leone. There he studied and became a Christian. He returned to Yoruba land as a missionary. Because he was Yoruba, he could speak their language and knew their culture. This made the work of spreading the good news a bit easier. He was the one who translated the Bible into the Yoruba language, and this was a very important event in the history of Christianity in Nigeria. Now let's talk about the first time these missionaries met the Yoruba people. Imagine the scene. White men arrived in a Yoruba town, everyone came out to see them, children ran calling each other, "Come see the white people!" The elders came out with a mix of fear and courage. They looked at them from head to toe. Their clothes were different, their hair was different, and the language they spoke sounded like a strange song to their ears. What did these strangers come to do? Did they come to fight, or did they bring peace? The missionaries, with the help of interpreters, began to explain why they came. They said they didn't come to fight. They said they brought good news from a God who is greater than all idols. They talked about Jesus, the Son of God, who died for the sins of all people. For the Yoruba, this was something completely new. Only one God? A God who has no image, whose statue cannot be carved. This surprised them. They already knew Olodumare, but they believed that the Orishas were intermediaries between them and Olodumare. The missionaries first spoke with the kings and chiefs. This was smart, because if the king accepted, it would be easier for the people to accept. In Abeokuta, for example, they met Alake, who was the king of the Egba land. They explained their purpose to him. They gave him gifts, like a beautifully bound Bible. They told him that this new faith would bring development to his land. They talked about schools and hospitals. Some kings listened with suspicion, while others listened with interest. This first meeting was full of misunderstandings. Language was a big problem. Even though they had interpreters, translating some words was difficult. For example, how could they explain the Holy Spirit to people who had never heard of such a thing? How did they explain rising from the dead? People asked difficult questions. If your God is so powerful, why doesn't he show himself to us? Why can't we see him? These questions showed that the meeting wasn't just about accepting something new, but it was a conversation between two different cultures. As the good news started to spread, the reactions of the Yoruba people varied. Not everyone accepted it with open arms. Their reactions can be divided into three ways. Some saw it as a wonder, some resisted it, and some accepted it. Let's look at each of them. Those who saw it as a wonder were the ones who were first amazed by what the Europeans brought. They saw things they had never seen before: clocks, mirrors, and guns. They also saw miraculous healing. When the missionaries used foreign medicine to heal the sick, it seemed like magic to the people. On the other hand, there was resistance, and it was strong. Who were the ones who resisted this new faith? The idol worshippers and the babalawos, traditional priests, were the first to resist it. They saw the Christian faith as a threat to their position and their traditional culture. They started telling the people that the Orishas would be angry if they abandoned them. They said that epidemics would come, and that the land would no longer yield crops. In some places, those who became believers were persecuted. They were driven out of their families, and people refused to have anything to do with them. They saw them as traitors to their culture. After the resistance, there was acceptance. What made some people accept it? There were many reasons. Slaves and the poor found hope in the good news. The Christian faith taught that all people are equal before God. This gave courage to those who had no standing in society and self-worth. Also, the opportunity for education was a draw. Parents wanted their children to be educated because they saw that literacy was a path to a better future. So they sent their children to the missionary schools, and this brought the children closer to the Christian faith. There's a story about how the faith entered a town. In that town, a king's wife was very ill. All the babalawos had tried, but there was no change. When a missionary heard, he went to the palace and he prayed for the woman. Within a few days, the woman started to recover. This miracle made the king and many in the town believe in Jesus. Stories like this happened in many places, and it made the people. As the number of believers kept growing, there was, a real need for a place of worship. In the beginning, people would gather under a big tree or maybe inside the house of one of the believers. But honestly, that just wasn't enough. They needed a place set apart for God. So that's how they started building the very first churches. These early churches were, really different from what we know today. They were made from clay, with roofs covered in leaves. They were small and simple. Yet for those first believers, that was truly the house of God. The first church built in Nigeria was in Badagry in the year 1842. They called it the Cathedral Church of St. Thomas. It wasn't big, but it was a sign of a new beginning. In Abeokuta, they built St. Peter's Church at Ake in 1846. Building these churches was a community effort. The missionaries drew up the plans, but it was the new believers who built them with their own hands. They cut the wood, molded the clay, and carried the stones. They did the work with joy and excitement, singing as they worked. The first day of worship in the new church was a day of great joy. Everyone wore their best clothes. They sat on wooden benches or mats. As the service began, everything was so different from the old ways. There were no sacrifices, no drums for the Orisha. Instead, they sang hymns to Jesus. The missionary would preach from the Bible and explain God's word. They prayed together and shared Holy Communion. For many, it was an experience that brought peace and comfort to their hearts. But, honestly, those first church services were not easy. They had to learn new songs and new prayers. At first, the hymns were in English. People sang them almost like they were reciting poetry. But when Samuel Ajayi Crowther and others began to translate the hymns into Yoruba, things started to change. People began to sing with real passion. They started adding local drums to the church music. Little by little, worship began to have the color and sound of Yoruba land. It became something of their own, no longer something foreign. Christianity didn't stay only in Yoruba land. Like a fire fanned by the wind, the good news spread to other parts of Nigeria. From Badagry and Abeokuta, missionaries and new believers started traveling to the east and north. They crossed the Niger River and entered the land of the Igbo people. There they met people who had their own culture and language. They did there what they had done in Yoruba land. They first found the village leaders and started preaching. In Igbo land, Christianity spread like wildfire. The Igbo people loved progress in education. When they saw the schools and hospitals that the missionaries brought, they welcomed them with open arms. Many young people wanted to get an education so they could work with the colonialists. This made them draw closer to the church. Missionaries like Mary Slessor did great work in the Calabar area. She fought hard to stop the practice of killing twins, and showed Christ's love to everyone. The spread to northern Nigeria was a bit different. The northern region had been under Islam for a long time, so the missionaries faced more challenges there than in the south. The House of Fulani people already had their faith and they didn't want to change it. Nevertheless, the missionaries didn't give up. They went to non-Muslim areas in central Nigeria, like the lands of the Tiv, Idoma, and Byrom people. In these areas, the good news found fertile ground to grow. They built churches and established the faith. One important thing that helped the faith spread was the role of Nigerians themselves. When people like Samuel Ajayi Crowther and others became pastors and bishops, they could preach to their people in a language they understood. They understood their culture and knew how to make the good news fit within that culture. Traders from the south who went north to do business also brought their faith with them. They started small churches where they lived. In this way, the good news reached every corner of Nigeria. As time went on, Christian faith in Nigeria began to change. It didn't stay the way the first missionaries left it. It grew and took on an African flavor. One of the big changes was the start of the Aladura churches in the early 1900s. Churches like Cherubim and Seraphim and Christ Apostolic Church began. These churches really focused on the power of prayer, healing, and prophecy. They used traditional drums and sang loudly and with passion. Their worship was full of energy that fit the Yoruba culture and way of thinking. These Aladura churches brought faith closer to the people. They felt that the missionary churches had forgotten important parts of faith, like fighting evil spirits and finding solutions to everyday problems through prayer. Prophets like Moses Orimolade and Joseph Ayo Babalola became very famous. They performed many miracles which brought many people to their churches. For the first time, Nigerians were leading their own churches without foreign control. In the 1970s, another new wave came. This was the wave of Pentecostal churches. Churches like Redeemed Christian Church of God, Living Faith Church, and Deeper Life. Bible Church started to grow rapidly. These churches emphasized being born again, being baptized in the Holy Spirit, and boldly preaching the good news. They used modern musical instruments and built huge church buildings called megachurches. They also used radio and television to spread the good news. This growth has made Christian faith in Nigeria very diverse. Today, you can see an old Anglican church on one side, and a lively Pentecostal church on the other. You can see a CNS church with their white robes and a Catholic church with their organized worship. They all worship the same God, but in different ways. This variety shows how deeply Christian faith has taken root in our society, and how it has taken on many different forms and looks. Today, June 13, 2078, we can't tell the story of the Yoruba land or Nigeria without talking about Christianity. It has become a very important part of our lives. From the names we give our children to how we celebrate, the influence of Christianity is clear. Names like Oluwafunmilayo, David, Esther, and Emmanuel have become common. When we have weddings or funerals, we hold services in churches. Hymns and prayers have become part of our customs. Christianity has influenced other things too. Gospel music, as we know it, has become one of the most popular music genres in Nigeria. Artists like Tope Alabi, Sinach, and Nathaniel Bassey have become famous worldwide. They use Yoruba and English to sing praises to God. Also, Nigerian films known as Nollywood often have themes based on Christianity. They show the power of prayer over dark forces. However, the relationship between Christianity and traditional culture still exists. Many Yoruba Christians still respect some traditions. For example, they still wear traditional clothes to church, and they use Yoruba proverbs and deep sayings when preaching. Some churches have even started using beta and dundun drums in their worship. This shows that instead of Christianity destroying culture, it has lived with it and given it new meaning. With all this, Christianity in Nigeria faces challenges. Problems like dishonesty among some church leaders and too much focus on wealth and success have made some people start to doubt. Still, for most Nigerians, faith is a source of hope, comfort, and strength. In times of trouble, the church is a safe haven. In times of joy, that's where they give thanks. It has gone beyond just religion, it has become a way of life. In the end, the story of Christian faith in Nigeria is a story full of change, challenges, and growth. It started as a small seed planted by missionaries from overseas. This seed met a different land, a land that already had its own customs and beliefs. At first it seemed like the seed wouldn't grow, but with patience, love, and God's power, it started to grow. It grew leaves, blossomed, and took deep roots in Nigerian soil, especially in the Yoruba land. From the small mud churches of the 19th century, we now see huge churches that can hold thousands of people today. From slow English hymns, we now have powerful and passionate Yoruba praise songs. This journey is not over. Every day, the Christian faith continues to change, meet new challenges, and impact people's lives. It has become ours, something we have made our own. This story teaches us an important lesson, that when two cultures meet, they don't destroy each other. Instead, they change each other. Christian faith changed Yoruba culture, and Yoruba culture also changed the way we worship God. This is what gave birth to the strong and colorful faith we see in Nigeria today. It is proof of the gospel's power to take root wherever it is planted, and of people's power to accept something new and make it their own. So, as we look to the future, this journey of faith will continue. What will be the next step? No one knows. But one thing is sure, the story of Christian faith and the story of Nigeria have become one. They have blended like clay and water, and as new generations rise, they will write new chapters in this great story. A story of faith, a story of hope, and a story of people who met God in a way that changed their lives forever. Thank you.